This is Dave Monk, Prairie Monk, WEFT, Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board.
And Joseph on the camera. And we have a number of things to report today. Mainly, I'm very pleased with the Savoy Prairie on Route 45 South. And we'll say something about that. And deal perhaps a little bit with the amount of plastic that's going into dumpsters. But okay, in passing, we lost R.J. Carlstrom this week. His father passed not too long ago, and he's an artist in the Lincoln Building. I tend to like to report on people who are part of our community. The Lincoln Building is just up the street, and he had been an artist there for quite some time. And his father was an attorney and a musician, and also represented the music industry as a union. And so these are people who we don't see very much, but are people who are in our neighborhood. So just we should know who people are. You talk to people on the street, and often that's very friendly, and it helps us to know each other. Last night I had someone who came down asking about silkscreen printing, and was able to talk to them about that. And we need to do that from time to time to make announcements on our prairies. Okay, let's go to Savoy. Wow, it's only a couple of weeks since we had that mown so that the trees were out. It was a little bit of concern at the prime time because a number of people were afraid that that was the first attempt to put a strip mall on that site. Not so. The beneficiaries here were, one, the prairie people, because we were able to take the trees off most of the corridor, mainly because the prairie didn't have trees. They were volunteers as the railroads drained, and as the roads drained, it permitted invasive trees to come in, and the invasive trees shade out the prairie. So one, the prairie was benefiting. Two, Ameren is wanting to replace regular poles with galvanized steel towers that are much higher, much less likely to get shorted to trees. And they agreed to mow without the use of herbicide. And that was very successful, very costly, huge hi-ho with a bush hog on the end of it, and aided by a bobcat with a bush hog on it. So both pieces of equipment working together spent about 2 days to mow 1 mile by about 50 feet of prairie in Savoy. The plants are responding. Both pieces of equipment had cleat on them, so that was spread the weight so that the plants are currently growing in the cleat tracks. So I'm very pleased. Most of the prairie plants are underground. In the case of a compass plant or a dock, they have a big carrot underneath. It goes down. The roots form niches so that the underground soils are occupied in a number of different ways. The grasses are more fibrous, and that takes up a different niche. And so the grasses also have been decapitated some, which is sort of what happens at this time of the year, especially if you burn. And the grasses are growing through. Starry-eyed grass, which comes at this time of the year, is struggling through and doing well. Things like New Jersey tea are there, and they were there years ago. So we know that this corridor is being disturbed, but it is in pieces here and there, quite nicely natural. Sometimes it's been added to with Department of Transportation plantings and the like, and some of our own reconstructions. But it's a site that is very, very public, and we'd like people to know about it. We need to put signs on it again. We've had signs on it over the years that alert people to the fact that this is a prairie, not just a bunch of weeds. It has a few weeds in it, but it is basically a prairie with relatively undisturbed prairie soil, and that's what we like to get. The advantages to us for prairie, the advantages to Amaran are that they don't have shorting to the ground or to the trees. And for the railroads, it saves them coming along with this herbicide train and herbiciding 40 feet out from the railroad track. Now, the prairie plants are growing. They're very grateful to not be shaded out, but you have to know that the trees that have little shoots and trees that are seeds will still come. So one of the challenges for us will be to try and keep the prairie clean and free of trees. That's a tremendous request, and we hope it will go on for 200 years. So we're thinking long term, and that means you have to have a generational interest, and it's not easy to do that. It can be helped by intermittent help by groups, and we had Rotary down there on Saturday morning picking up the trash, which became very obvious once the corridor was opened up. And so I ended up taking up quite a few photographs and taking visitors down there to see the prairie plants growing in spring. It's not so easy. You don't have any flowers. You don't have, even the leaves may be a little distorted. The early leaves are kind of sometimes different from the later leaves. So I take photographs so with the hope that we can give those photographs to people like Rotary clubs or other agencies that might be involved and might not even know, even though they're clearing up the corridor, we don't know exactly what is there. We are very thankful to people like Michelle Henderson, who has a forestry background but also is involved with the village board, but she also works for Amaran and has control over the power lines and their clearance around them. So we were very, very pleased to have her come along and look at the ecology, and eventually Amaran, I'm not sure who had power to do what, but we got the trees mown, and that was a tremendous advantage. So one of the things we have to do is create awareness. And I hope to take people who are professionals back to the prairie so they see. And to take people to the site is important, because very few of us know more than 20 species of prairie plants. And a lot of us don't know any prairie plants at all, even though that's our traditional habitat or our heritage. So taking people down there, just looking around, take a camera. I use a single lens reflex, but I also use a little camera. Sometimes you can even get closer to a plant with a little camera than a bigger camera. And just to kick the soil and figure out what's going on. To find the little starry-eyed grass, which has got a flower that's less than the size of your little fingernail, you have to almost crawl around to find it. I bought a couple of prairie dropseed plants because they're not there, and prairie dropseed is not that common. And it's nice to have more biodiversity, so I planted it there. Seedling plants like that often need to be watered, so you have to, if you do plant a little increase of biodiversity, you need to remember where you put things so that you can find them in the future. So I planted those plants near to a power pole so that I could find them and perhaps provide a little water later in the week to get them started. But prairie plants are reasonably tough, and very shortly they put down roots, and you won't see them very much. You won't see the plant because its top is not recognizable, but many of the tops are recognizable. I couldn't find the prairie clovers because they haven't come through yet, but rattlesnake master, bee balm, some of the more common prairie plants are there, and in June, July, these will be flowering, and I hope that some of you will go past and just go a little slower and look and enjoy the corridor. Just in case you don't see them, we take photographs at that time also, and I could really use some people who would be able to take those photographs and put them on a flash drive and make a statement that we may not be able to do just because it's time consuming and we don't have that sort of background talent. There's a lot of things we could do to keep that corridor alive. And there is a real concern that if that corridor widens, it's room enough for a strip mall, and you have to question whether you want to take out some of your last prairie or keep it, and there's a competition from a tax base. If you have a strip mall, you're going to have a tax base that is interesting and exciting. So we also have to talk to fire departments and the like to know when we can control burn and how we can control burn, and do we have enough equipment to do a control burn. If we're working with the state, they invariably come with a little four-wheeler with 500 gallons or 200 gallons of water on board and a long hose and walkie-talkie radio connections, and so they can control. So in the long run, we might want to even think about trying to get a grant for a fire department to have such equipment, or to add a sprayer on the front of fire trucks so that they can spray a mist rather than spray a 4-inch hose of water. Just some techniques and teaching each other how to do that and how to do it in perpetuity, because this is not something that happens today and that's the end of it. It's a constant maintenance thing. The area has now been cleaned, and it's explained by Cameron that in the fall they will be replacing those poles. And this helps to clear the area so that if you do have to have equipment on, you can see where the bumps and grinds are that would affect fairly delicate equipment. Some of those high-rise machines that go up almost 100 feet to put in power lines have to be sitting on reasonably stable ground. So to mow not only helps us, but it helps the future replacement of power lines. If you're looking at the area, there are power lines already existing on the east side, and they're being put in at this present time. It's bringing power to the university from a power line that goes through the south of Champaign-Urbana and Bonneville, and it's bringing more power to this community and less power onto old power lines that are sometimes a little overloaded. I'm looking at my notes just to see how you might get there. You just go down 45 to Windsor Road and then get into the eastern or the roadside lane, and you'll see a big advertising sign, and there's a little road adjacent to that advertising sign. Be careful that there's no one behind you that's expecting you to travel down that road at 45 miles an hour, because you're going to turn suddenly at the sign. And when you get there, you can park on the old railroad bed, because when Windsor Road was put in, the railroad was lifted 7 feet and taken east about 25 feet. So there's room for you to plant on your park on the old railroad bed, and we have assured that you can park probably 10 cars there without fear of running into something like a railroad spike. And you can identify the site also by the fact that we didn't mow a site of roses. It's a Sunshine Road. It's a vertical rose, whereas most roses on the prairie are linear. They run along the soil, and you can grab them at one place and lift them up. They'll be runners that will run 10, 15 feet. So this is a standard rose, and it's called Sunshine Rose, and it's about to bloom. So if you go down there, you watch it and watch the next couple of weeks. The Golden Alexander is already blooming nicely, even though it was run over. And so just take an effort to see what is there so that you know its value. Be aware, because it's a valuable site. The Curtis Road end is a little bit more established with grasses, and we would like to include a few more broadleaves in the south end of the corridor. It also quiets down the possibility of fire. If fire gets into a grass prairie, it's got a lot of litter, and it can burn, and burn perhaps even 200 feet high. And that's partially where red bison, that has control of the area, gets its name. Now, red bison was what you saw when you look into the air with a prairie burn. So if we could infuse more broadleaves, the fire potential is a little less. We have an interesting association with the people in the Savoy Mall, many of whom are aware that the prairie is there, and many of whom have helped us to maintain it, or at least are aware of it, and we can take them across and show them the starry-eyed grass or whatever is there at the time. On a football day when the traffic is going slow, this is a prime site for education. We don't mow a trail through it because the current thinking on prairies, where there are very few prairies left, is that the buffalo wouldn't have moved through the prairie. Sometimes cattle do move in trails, but this tendency is to get people to move through the prairie in a non-alligator trail style. And you have to imagine that you're like a buffalo and you're pressing the soil. So you're not pressing the soil in one little trail. Each one has a contribution to make. So you, in effect, are a simulated buffalo. And we'll encourage that. If you make a trail and it is 4 foot wide, that takes out quite a bit of prairie. And around the corner at Lake Park, which took a lot of the prairie off this corridor when it was widened, is having a concern about whether the trail should be 5 feet or 4 feet. 4 feet is just enough to stop small cars or off-road vehicles from using the territory. So Lake Park has put up some signs to say, please don't pick the prairie, but use it and care for it. And a 4 foot trail for us is much more amenable than something a little wider than that. So once again, take photographs and enjoy. Lake Park has also put up some nice signs, and a quality sign means a quality concern for a site. We really need to put up some signs for temporary problems, like a few signs that explain what we're doing with mowing would be very helpful. And sometimes we can do that very simply with a silkscreen press, and we can almost do that on the street. We don't have to have a very sophisticated situation to make notices that will last about a year, year and a half, 3 years sometimes, and let you know what's going on. It also lets people who are working on the prairie know that it is a place that is cared for. Workers, like on the herbicide train, are very aware that there are such sites, and they're quite willing to go along with not herbiciding if you are there. You have to also make sure that you don't have a lot of weeds. Weeds are very recognizable. We have, for instance, some hemlocks which need to be taken out. But someone who's a weed specialist that's trained in Purdue to be on a herbicide train will recognize things like hemlocks and want to take them out. And the same goes for trees. So. But your activity is on the site is there. Often it's much better to have personalities on your prairie than to have a project that is reported on. The journalism of this is that people enjoy to see somebody's doing something, somebody has a personality. That is old standard in journalism is to take a photograph of action rather than to report on something. So if you're there, take a photograph. Take the photograph to a friend, because the same principle works with friends. I can actually take my camera and show you pictures of what I have been taking. And sometimes I take more than I need because I just go a little bit further and there's a better image. And so we have to sort that out on a computer and do interesting things with it. So it might be something that you put on a flash drive and give to the Rotary Club or to the Savoy Village Board. It's fairly simple to do, and we like to do it, but it also needs someone who's a little bit attuned to doing community action work and gets people together. That is a skill in itself, and we like to encourage that. Professional people also often have their specific engineering requirements, but don't always understand the biology or the sociology of a natural and cultural preservation. So it's kind to them to appreciate, or to help them appreciate, the value of the site. This is aided by groups like the Grand Prairie Friends. The Grand Prairie Friends had a huge sale last week, very successful. They had an article in the News Gazette that involved monarch butterflies and their fact that they are not appearing as they used to. You used to be able to see a tree They're just loaded with monarch butterflies. We haven't seen that sort of thing anymore. So plants that are in the family of milkweeds sold very well. And then Grand Prairie Friends again was present at a sale of barrels to encourage water preservation. So that was doing well. They had a lot of barrels there. They sold for something like $35, but it allows you to take water off your roof and store it and then use it in things like a rain garden. You can create a rain garden with a little ditch, perhaps, that goes down to if you have a slope in your area, it allows the water to infiltrate rather than just run off into the city stormwater roadside events. It stops flooding and helps you grow a garden that might have a wet spot and a dry spot and create interest in your backyard. It may have a shaded area, it may be an open area. If you're going to try to plant prairie there, you will have to have fairly open light. So Grand Prairie Friends was at that sale and also selling plants. That's where I bought my drop seed. The market on the square on Saturday was doing very, very well, and people communicating with each other. It's expanding and doing well. So now, let's go to some other sites. The principle of the mowing on Route 45 applies to other sites like Monticello, where we've been talking about Armenia, and the preservation of a cultural site with an elevator. It goes to the area between Savoy and not Savoy, Seymour, Whiteheath, and Lodge, which has the potential to be a trail. It goes to Clinton. It goes to a lot of the sites that we have great difficulty surveilling and surviving, because as the price of corn goes up, so we have invasion. So this week I did go to the Packer board to report on the fact that I'd asked the university it owns the Armenia site at Allerton Park. It's a historic site in the fact that Sam Allerton got a lot of his money by providing the Civil War Union troops with food that made it successful for the Army to work. So this is part of national history, part of local history, part of Midwest history. Can we save those buildings as a complex, the house, the farm buildings? Can we perhaps combine that with something like sustainable agriculture, perhaps some vegetable gardening, which will perhaps make use of the buildings? And our railroad bed goes right through by the elevator, and we're wanting to have a bicycle trail there, which will be a natural history trail. Not a huge 8-foot wide trail, but we've been meeting with a Farnsworth group, which has been brought in by Monticello to make a master plan. So some of you should be interested in perhaps appearing before the Farnsworth group through the village of the city of Monticello to see how you would like to ride a bicycle around Allerton Park, how you would also like to a ride between Danville and Decatur. So we're still working with the Kickapoo Trail. I had a little bit more to say about trees on the prairie at Route 150, between Main Street and 150. That's an area that was wonderful prairie, and even though it's been disturbed to widen the road for Walmart, it's still prairie soil, so we don't really get too excited about having trees there. With the land invasion, we've been working with the Dodd Group. Bob Dodd has passed on. He was mayor of Champaign at one stage and knew very well what we were doing. So his group is still in action. So I've been working with Kyle Emkus and figuring out how we can forward a cease and desist situation to, or legal request to, the farmer that has us dug up just west of Weldon. And we have a very good title there. We need to know that that title's been transferred from the railroad company to the county records, and actually investigate the surrounding titles so that in one case we have a very good statement that says the next door neighbor owns the land except the railroad right-of-way, which makes it very positive that we do own that territory. It's been planted at the moment, but we have to keep our eyes on that sort of thing. Then I think I want to say something about plastic. The Savoy, the Mervis Marco salvage yard just south of here, just near to WEFT, it's less than a half mile away, has been taking salvage material for years and years and years. And it's sort of walk-in. But that has recently closed. It's not a site that has been large enough to encourage a railhead, the like of Illinois Central or Canadian National would wish to take on quite a number of rail cars at regular intervals if they're going to have to work with sidings that slow general traffic, because if you have a lot of sidings and a lot of diamonds, it's not easy to run a train across those sidings at a fairly heavy speed, and you're talking about a main line. So attempts to have a railhead there have been not possible. So the salvage yard from Mervis and Marco have been taken out to Cunningham Avenue on Route 45 to Rantoul, and there is a huge organization. The road has been widened so that you can bring a truck in, but it also means that the wee folk, little folk who could walk our junk into the salvage yard can't do that anymore. You have to get in a vehicle, and that makes it less cost effective. But both Marco and Mervis, Marco came into the act early on, and Mervis brought him out. That Mervis has moved to Cunningham about a mile north of Farm and Fleet, a mile north of Route 74, and you can go there, and they do have an agreement with ABC to take plastic and other materials that they don't take. They do take plastic, and So you can take mostly water jug type materials from restaurants that are soft plastic. We're not into hard plastic yet. Max on on Lincoln Avenue North are also working with ABC and taking in mixed plastics, not hard plastic, but soft plastic, and that is not open to the general public in the sense that it's open all times, but while MAC is open or Mervis is open, then you can take the plastic. You don't get paid for it, but you can deposit your plastic there. You can also deposit your cardboard. You get paid for aluminum and steel, and that's part of the purpose of this, is to have a flow line for trucks. And this site is at the end of Olympian Drive, so you do have road access for material to be shipped, and Mervis does have railhead access at Danville and I think Decatur, perhaps Mattoon also. So the handling of salvage is a rather important event. The amount that doesn't get into this flow line bothers me a lot. There's no real commercial pickup of the soft plastic that we're talking about. So this week I took a typical 2-day deposit of plastic into a dumpster behind the Lincoln Building, and I pulled out, as usual, about a small toter, probably 50 or 60 gallon toter of plastic. A lot of that plastic was plastic bags, and eventually it adds up to quite a volume, but also a weight of material. I wanted to document this some, because there was something like, in this 2-day period, there were something like 6 plastic milk jugs, containers. There were a lot of water bottle type containers, but there was also plastic cups. You don't have to have plastic cups. You can have cardboard cups. They're not quite as attractive to most people who have been used to drinking from plastic, but if you explain to them why you're doing it, then there's a much more tolerance for it. And Mike and Molly's, just down the road from us, has been doing very well with paper cups. And you can take those and recycle them so that you have 20 or 30 cups, and they can be recycled in a manner that is much better than having them all jumbled up. You can also let them, if necessary, go to the landfill, and because they're paper, they can rot. They can be eaten by bacteria and fungi and creatures that can take advantage of the cellulose. So it's not a matter of sending plastic cups to 35 miles to just dump in the landfill for years and years. So this week there was also, it's graduation time, so I picked out a couple of items that seem to me to be totally recyclable as reusable. And so there were reusable items there, and I can encourage you this week to go dumpster diving if you have to. Take a couple of drums, put a board across them so that you can get high enough that you can drop into the dumpster and find what you have. It's cheaper in some cases if you've got a job in California to throw out your computer that's aged here and buy a new one in another community. But that kind of is a waste and duplication, and that piece of equipment should go to places like Mervis territory and or to Max or other places that take equipment. And it goes back to the equipment should be designed so that you can salvage from it in an appropriate manner. If you mix materials so that they can't be separated, that is a problem. So I take a photograph of these. I would like people to know that there's that volume, about 50 gallons, mostly air, mostly plastic, that we can recycle relatively easily. It costs money, but if people are working with you at a restaurant and they know that you're recycling, then there's a gentle advantage to doing that. It's nice to see those little things happen. Like Mike and Molly's put in a goose for cigarette butts and just tidies up things just a little bit and makes it nice. So he's also put up a sign, so I no longer have to stand in the street and answer questions about where is Mike and Molly's, and it's right there. So just these little things. The question is, could we have some plants there? Well, that might not be a bar thing, but it's the ivy is climbing over the walls, and that adds to a little sound softening and a little visual corridor that is helpful. The little prairie across the road is also doing well. We've had volunteers to help give it a haircut, and we continue to need volunteers. We have to be very helpful ourselves because it takes talent to bring volunteers together. WEFT has that challenge too, is how to bring people together and to keep them available. Often volunteers are prepared to do a one-day event, but not necessarily to commit themselves for a whole period. So somehow you have to have one or two people who have the ability to bring those people back together again for efforts, and to not demand that they be on a board or anything like that. They're volunteers for a day, and there's a sort of research that says that this is not an unusual pattern in volunteerism. I'm dealing with oil at the moment. Oil, going back to the salvage situation, oil is not a legal thing to put into used oil. It does not go into a dumpster, because when it goes into a dumpster, it invariably gets to be injured and leaks and causes a problem. So I want to suggest that. Now, I think that's enough said about recycling, but let's take you to a prairie and see what you see at the moment. And one of the main things you see at the moment is the silphiums, the docks and the compass plants. They're not the world's greatest plants in terms of they're not that rare. They grow very well, in fact, but they have a history and they're part of the prairie, and they're often an indication that there are other things you should look for. So if you see a dock and a compass plant and you see something like golden Alexander and starry-eyed grass at this time, you have to say, wow, that may be original soil. Let's go with it. So some of the other things that you see right at the present time are quite bushy because they've been on perhaps our prairie for perhaps 1,000 years. And so another silphium is rosinweed. It doesn't have a taproot like compass plant or dock, but it has a fairly heavy fibrous root system and interesting, very yellow flowers that come in June, July, August, and they accompany the other silphiums. Then there are all the grasses. There are about 6 grasses, and some of them at the moment are greening up and coming through the litter that was there before from the last season. So there's, if you're in a dry spectrum, little blue stem at the top of the hill, Indian grass and big blue stem, both about 8 feet tall. The little blue stem is more like 2 feet tall, and it's a little at the skeletal top of the soil, catena. The catena is a range of soils going down from skeletal to going down a hill to Drummer and Flanagan at the bottom of the hill, which is a rich, deep, black soil. So the soil on the top of the hill may be more forest in orientation because there's some drainage there. It might be a little more yellow, and you're going down to a very darker soil, and that's often swampy land when we first came, so people like at Flatville would drain that, and then they get very good soil. So the spectrum for grasses is little blue stem high, Indian grass and big blue stem about 8 foot high on the medium dampness, and then cordgrass on the damp side. There's also side oats grammar, which is not quite so common in this area, more towards the west, and sometimes June grass. But the main one at the lower level is cordgrass. It can be about 10 feet tall, and it does well with its feet in water. So it can be grown from seed, but it takes about 10 years to mature from seed. So mostly we move that by just taking the clones and taking a shovel full of roots, and the cordgrass will grow. The broadleaves that we have that are coming up and showing very well at the moment include the mints. The mint family has a square stem, so if you put your fingers around it, you'll feel it's square, and it's very aromatic. So if it's a catnip, it'll be aromatic. If it's a bee balm, it'll be aromatic. And these are plants that have a sort of salvia type flower on them, and the bumblebees absolutely adore them, and so they're pollinators. When they're in big enough clump, you can see them from the road without too much bother at all. The rattlesnake master is coming up. The rattlesnake master has got a leaf which has little projections on it. It looks like yucca, so its second name is yuccifolia. But it doesn't have a huge flower. It has a head, and it's doing quite well at the moment. I don't see the legumes, but I do see the farm legumes, the sweet clover, which it does get in our way. Clover is unfortunately quite a good pollinator. It provides food for honey, and so it's still encouraged in some cases. But if we have it on a prairie, it is so invasive that it takes out other creatures. But it's already growing well, and I can find it, whereas I cannot find the prairie purple clover and white clover that I know are there. It doesn't hurt for you to get an idea where some patches are. If you find a patch of white clover, for instance, you might remember that. So we're trying to make maps. We haven't always been making maps because sometimes maps direct people to a prairie that is rare enough that we don't want it to be destroyed. So sometimes rare sites are kept fairly secret just so that they don't lose their endangered species or the total ecology which is intact. But when you have a fairly rough, tough prairie like the one on Route 45, it doesn't hurt for you to know that you can go to the little road that goes in by the advertising sign, by the rose bushes, and find various species there that are doing well. You'll also find some hemlock. So we need you to come help us with the umbelliferae. The umbelliferae is a family that is an umbrella on top of an umbrella, and golden Alexander falls into that class. It also includes carrots and parsnips, and parsnips especially, and hemlocks. Hemlocks are also in the umbelliferae family. Are weedy elements, and they indicate that there's been disturbance. So we need to take those out. So we need volunteers to work on those sites, and we have to warn them that there's an active ingredient in the sap that comes out of those plants that can give you dermatitis. So you need to know how to work with that area or those plants. But they're very sappy and easy to destroy before they produce 1,000 seeds that stay there for the future. So a little bit of constant use of a machete is very, very helpful. I'm trying to think what else I saw. I've mentioned roses. I also found a little bit of poison ivy. I know exactly where it is. We could map it. It tends to be reduced in effect by fires. But there it is, 3 leaves, let it be, nice and pink, and with veins that are pink. And so if you know your site and you know your plant, you know how to avoid it. You also, if you're going to stomp in the prairie, need to know that when you go home you have to look for livestock, because there'll be perhaps a tick or two. And I don't want to discourage you to go to the prairie, but prairies come with chiggers and a few other things, and if you were to avoid those totally, then you would lose the wonder of going to a prairie and enjoying it. Sometimes we don't know, but it would seem that some prairies have more chiggers on them than others. So it's kind of fun to figure out what is happening with nature.
So you've made a point pretty much every single week that a weed is not a weed is not a weed, that a lot of things people look at and say, oh, that's ugly, so that must be a weed. It turns out to be New Jersey tea, and it's actually really, really valuable. So would you say the exact same thing about insects that we call pests? People would call ticks and chiggers and flies and spiders and whatever pests, but are they actually of real value to a prairie?
Yes, you don't exactly know. We haven't had the money to pay researchers to know what the relationships are between things. There was a program this week on WILL talking about a bird that was almost exterminated by cowbirds that are willing to lay their eggs in another bird's nest. And so this warbler was almost extincted. But then they took out the cowbirds. They had traps for cowbirds, and gradually the warblers came back. But then they found out that the warblers didn't come back quite so easily, but by accident they had a fire. And the fire took out or brought in another factor, and that fire alerted them to the fact that they needed young trees. And so this is a management deal. This is why people go to the university to study ecology, ethology, and evolution, to ecology, land management, to work with landscape architecture so that you can have a natural program as well as that fits in with nature. So the U of I NRES, what used to be the College of Agriculture, has a Master Gardener program for people who are interested in gardening, but it also has a Master Naturalist program where you start to think about some of these sorts of things. And some of the information that we don't know about, you may actually figure out yourself and become a vital person in recording information. Sometimes that's done through Audubon. Audubon will have bird count, so that a lot of the information that researchers use is accumulated by volunteers across the nation that count birds at a certain time. So you know how the population is doing. So it's a very good question that you have. Yes, so the tick may be an annoyance, but it may have something to do with another creature. There may be a whole life cycle in there. It may be that the ant that we don't enjoy will be pollinating something. So we don't have the money to have a research knowledge of what is a prairie, and that means we may even lose our prairie before we've got enough information to save it. It's almost like the elephants will be gone before we know exactly what their brain is like and how they remember things and like. Sometimes birds are so much more specifically designed to do something, including to have their own speech language, and we don't know about that much. But we got 1 minute. Well, I would like to say, if anyone wants to go to the prairie, give me a call. It's 351-1911 or 840-1911. Repeat that again, 351-1911, 840-1911. And we'll see how we can get you to the nearest local prairie, and then perhaps you will want to go further and see a slightly more natural prairie. So this has been Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT, Champaign. Thank you for listening.